the sort of business as usual trajectory is that people would be boiled alive just in the shade. So why this isn't on the front page of every paper, every website, every day is part of our challenge. So I'm going to talk a bit about the politics of it. Again, it's just the show. Here's carbon dioxide, 1950. Whoa, that's where we are now, and it's just going up. We know that we are still emitting more greenhouse gases every single day. And the average global temperature of the planet is going up. I don't have to say that today with 100-degree weather. Just, you know, the impacts are here. This was Harvey last year. This is all that one August of last year. Irma, Maria, billions of dollars. This is the California wildfires. Our part of the country and the world is going to see disproportionate precipitation, for one thing, which we've already started to see. This was this past winter. I don't know if anyone saw the video of the dumpster floating down the street. A dumpster floating down a street in the seaport. That got some people's attention. That was Boston. Some folks might have seen the videos from or experienced Situate. This was compelling to me. You have Elon Musk, pretty smart guy. The recently departed Stephen Hawking, pretty smart guy. Both saying we are probably going to need to go to another planet thanks to climate change. I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy, and we're doing it to ourselves, right? I did have some slides earlier, but in the interest of time, didn't pull the slides of Trump's tweets and so forth. I don't think I need to tell this crowd, we're not getting leadership from Washington, D.C. right now, right? I mean, the head of the EPA had to be, was tossed out due to corruption, not even this crazy environmental stuff. And now the head of the EPA is literally a former coal lobbyist. It's sort of a mantra now that states have to lead and cities and towns have to lead. And that's why I do feel privileged to be in the positions I am, working at an environmental organization, being a city councilor here. Is anyone here from Massachusetts originally? We have some native massholes here. Okay, so we know that we are smarter than everyone, right? Having been born in raised here in Newton, actually born in Weston, but moved to Newton as a 4-year-old. We do know that we're very well educated, literally the most educated state in the country. Can people remember some things that we've led on recently, some pretty ground-changing, not just environmental, but sort of things that we've led on here in Massachusetts? Gay marriage. Right? Romney Care. Obamacare was Romney Care first before he was for it, before he was against it. Bump stocks, we were the first state to ban bump stocks after Las Vegas, okay? So we just had some examples there. But that does mean there is more responsibility on us to lead. And for folks who follow what happens in our state legislature, and I know Ellie does and so forth, we had an opportunity to pass really ambitious climate change legislation, and we whiffed. The Senate passed a very aggressive bill. The House passed a pretty mediocre bill. And in the conference committee process to negotiate an agreement, basically the House won, and what passed does not match the urgency of our time. And what's crazy about that as a political person is that WBUR did a poll last year that found that 88% of Massachusetts voters, not residents, voters, and to a legislator, it's only voters that matter, okay? Believe in climate change. So 88%, and that had gone up 10 points in the last 2 years. 88% believe in climate change, think it's caused by humans, and are somewhat or very alarmed by it. So you have this legislature that's really not ambitious at all, and then you have a populace. If we were in Oklahoma, I could see like, oh wow, it's all we could do to get something lame through. But we're not in Oklahoma. We're Massachusetts, where people want us to lead, and we need to be leading, and yet that's not happening. Why does that not happen? Our legislature is not a democracy. Folks may know this, but I don't think you know all of it. So the Speaker and the House Ways and Means Chair hold a lot of power. They also, our state legislature, exempts themselves from the open meeting law. So how many people here serve on a commission? Okay, yes, all right, so Tariq knows, he's on the Newtonville Area Council. You have to post your meetings 48 hours in advance. You can't talk about things that aren't on the agenda. As a city councilor, I cannot even send a group email to more than a quorum of other city councilors on any issue that we are deliberating. A group email. okay? We can email about our holiday party all we want, but we cannot do that because we are required to have transparency for all of you. The state legislature, in their wisdom, doesn't think they need to do that. They can deliberate behind closed doors, they can arm twist behind closed doors, they can vote behind closed doors. They've also exempted the governor and the judiciary. So in 2015, the Center for Public Integrity graded every state on various issues related to governance and transparency. Massachusetts earned a D+. And here are some of the grades. I don't know if you can see all these. State budget processes, a D. Public access to information, F. State service procurement got a B-. That wasn't so bad. But executive accountability, D-. I mean, it's a horror show. Here we are supposed to be a city on a hill and a state that's supposed to lead in a number of areas. But when it comes to the environment, this is a big reason why we're not leaders, okay? And then why the actions of our elected officials do not match what people want us to be doing. We also are a horror show when it comes to blocking access to documents. This was a Boston Globe article from a year or so ago. I have a longer, I'm happy to send these slides. I'm going to zip through it. I do have like an hour-long presentation, so I've cut it down quite a bit. But I want to tell a story so you understand exactly how stark this is. So this was November 2015. Has anyone ever heard of ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council? Okay, so this is the Koch brothers-funded right-wing group that focuses on state legislators, and they wine them and dine them, bring them to Cancun, God knows, what else they do there, but they give them a lot of training, a lot of support, give them model legislation. So this is anti-union, pro-corporate, anti-progressive legislation in the area of the environment. They hate solar, and so this bill that was introduced into the Mass House in November 2015 was basically the Koch brothers solar bill. I won't go into the details of it, but particularly on the reimbursement and the financing of solar projects would have made it much more difficult for many solar projects to move forward. Why did they do this? The electric utilities, which are very politically powerful, hate solar. The speaker also is very aligned with our electric utilities. So how do you think a bill like that would do in the Massachusetts legislature? This was only 3 years ago. It's not like we didn't know about climate change. Does anyone have any guesses on how this bill would do? There are 160 reps in the House legislature, in the House. So it passed 150 to 2, the Koch brothers solar bill in Massachusetts. I'd like to give a shout out to the two folks who did vote against it, from Watertown and from Somerville. Why is that? As I said, utilities hate solar that they don't control, for reasons I won't go into now, but we can do that during the Q&A. And the speaker is very, very closely aligned with the electric utility sector, and they do fund a lot of politicians in Massachusetts. So the final bill that ended up passing, Sierra Club still opposed. It was less horrible, but it was still pretty horrible. And we've seen the impacts, okay? Massachusetts used to have over 15,000 people employed in solar. Now it's under 12,000. We've lost, as it is, over 20% just in the last year. At a time where we should be embracing solar with both hands and feet and so forth, we're going the wrong direction. And it's because of politics. We were hearing a bit about the policy that we need to do. We're not going to get the right policy if we don't get the politics right. I won't go into this, but they also love fracked gas. So you're going to start seeing, you may have seen the Boston Globe editorials extolling the virtues of gas and why you should all be paying for a private interest to build more gas pipelines. Otherwise, your mother is going to be cold and in the dark, and you're going to be paying through the nose for your bills. You might have seen this from Governor Baker. So more of that is coming after the election. But again, it's tied to this. It's not just at the state level. We here in Newton are doing a lot, but people might remember there was a vote to install solar carports in our library 2 years ago. I don't know if folks remember that. We have installed a lot of solar, so I'm not saying that we're not doing anything, but it was like, okay, this is an opportunity, millions of dollars saved over the course of 20 years, good for climate change, etc., Newton being a leader. The vote didn't just it wasn't just defeated, it was crushed. I think the vote was like 15-8 against installing solar in our own library parking lot. Now, why did people vote against it? Most of the reasons were, okay, I will move more quickly. Sorry, that was too ugly, okay? So 2016 at this point, it's not like we didn't know that climate change was important and that Newton needed to lead and so forth. So it's not just, at the state level. All right, I'm jumping ahead. I'm not going to make you ask me, but what is the answer here? It's organizing. It's getting a group of people to meet with state reps. This was part of what I did for Sierra Club, my previous job. We also organized here in Newton. For folks who don't think that it's a big deal to pull 5 people together to meet with your city councilor or to meet with your state rep, keep in mind hardly anyone votes, which means that each voter is that much more valuable. I'm not saying it's a good thing that people don't vote. I'm just saying it makes each of you who do much more valuable. And I'll just give 2 quick examples and I'm done for how a difference it can be. Does anyone remember a couple years ago the news about upskirting? This guy was taking pictures of women's skirts on the subway. Horrible, right? Turns out it was not illegal. Went all the way to the Supreme Judicial Court. It was not illegal for him to do that. Does anyone remember how quickly the state legislators acted to make it illegal? 24 hours. They acted within 24 hours. I submit to you that climate change is at least as horrible as upskirting. And I am not a fan of upskirting. I am wearing a skirt right now. I am so against upskirting, right? But they acted. They acted when they heard from people and they felt that there was the urgency. An example here in Newton. We passed the Welcoming City Ordinance last year. I don't know if people remember this, but we moved much more quickly than we usually do. Why did we do that? And now I'm going to be taken away. The hook is coming. Because so many people spoke out. A couple opportunities coming up. Newton Power Choice could use some help on advocacy. 100% renewable ordinance is going to be discussed in October, could use some advocacy on. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Emily, for a very lively discussion about state politics. Clearly, everybody could talk for much longer than 12 minutes, but I understand it's a short time. But it gives people a flavor of some of the different areas that people are knowledgeable about, interested in, and pursuing. Our next speaker didn't actually talk about the political next, but I think it's going to be David.
Yeah, I think I just hit my power off button.
Okay. So David is going to present a 2050 roadmap, which talks about how we might implement some viable climate solutions.
While I'm fixing this, I apologize. It was all ready to go. No, I turned the computer off when I was trying to. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. I think
We'll start. Yeah. So while I've got some great pictures to show, some graphs, but what I plan to show you and talk about is trying to figure out some on-the-ground solutions, really talking about implementation to get to 2050, more on the technical side than the economic side, which we've heard. And it's interesting. I think the economics is definitely one part of the solution. But the other thing that this kind of analysis I'll eventually be able to show you really highlights is that we're working against the clock. So we've got, in order to meet what the Dr. Hansons of the world have told us, the climate scientists, we have to reduce emissions by a certain amount, 80% from 1990 levels by 2050. And I think as John said, that's really only the start. That gets us to a hopefully stabilized atmosphere, but then we have to continue on. There we go. All right. Continue on past that to 2100. So we're all here because I think we're interested in stopping climate change and mitigating. And as I said, that's a 80% reduction from 1990 levels by 2050. John mentioned he served on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the UN body that set these standards. But it's also, that standard is now in Massachusetts law, our 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act. So it's all tied to that international science. So how do we do that? How do we do that while maintaining a viable economy? Because I think we could spitball a few solutions, like how do we reduce emissions from cars? Well, one is you could just tell everybody they can't drive cars. it's a solution, right? But it kind of has a damper on people getting to work or going to soccer games. So it's a challenge of trying to maintain at least a certain modicum of our current standard of living as we go through. And there's proposals to radically change the way we live. And those could do it too, but I think at some point we all have to ask ourselves, what do we think we can accomplish in 30 years? One professional career. 30 years. So we could try and change everything, or we could just try and focus on solving climate change. So what are these roadmaps about? They're about implementation. At the top there, Europe has done this. It's a form of analysis that really just tries to work out the nuts and bolts of how we do it. I used to be in the Navy. I've got these maps here. It's basically reducing uncertainty, right? We're going from a world where we know we want to get across the ocean, but we don't know how to get there, and there's monsters and uncertainty. And we're going to chart that out. It doesn't mean we don't have to, we can stop making decisions and not do anything, but we have data that'll help us get there. And as I'll show you, it comes down, at least through this analysis, to scope and pace and scale of change. And interestingly, those things also map very well onto money and jobs. So if you know that you have to get 1 million EVs on the road, that's a big challenge. But if you have that, some of those markers out there, you can expect investors or hope that they'll come with some certainty that they know what the market will look like. So these roadmaps come up with multiple ways to get to 2050. Interestingly, they cover all sources and all sectors and do it all at the same time. And this is a challenge we've never had. I started in the electricity sector as an energy lawyer, and a lot of people spend their whole career just thinking about electricity. We have to do electricity, we have to do gas, we have to do cars, and we've really never regulated across sectors like this where, not that we don't have regulations in each sector, but the regulators and the regulations speak to each other and are interconnected. And that's new and it's hard. The roadmap's also at the bottom, just a couple phrases there. It helps to us to manage the situation, right? This is from sort of business school. You can't manage what you don't measure. And we do have an inventory. The latest inventory just came out from Massachusetts. And that's good. An inventory, I'm going to analogize again to my Navy career. It gives you your ship's position. It tells you right where you are, but without a chart and a plan, you don't necessarily know where to go, right? You need that data. So a roadmap, this is just some graphics of the kinds of analysis that comes out. This is a map of an electricity sector, supply and demand. You've got fossil, you've got hydro, wind, all these different colors, year by year by year, working out mixes that will get us eventually to our 2050 emissions. And that's important because all of these things are being generated by stuff, right? Stuff that costs a lot and gets installed. So 50-year nuclear power plants, 30-year offshore wind plants. And again, I'll just remind us, we got 32 years. So we're inside the replacement cycle for a lot of this equipment where we're at the point where anything we build now in certain sectors, we have every reasonable expectation that it will be up and running in 2050 unless we shut it down early. And that usually costs more money. You can do really neat assessments. These are on the electricity side again, mapping daily potential load of wind and solar, and let really smarter people than I am, people at MIT, figure out how to balance the system. We can do that all now, and so we should start doing this, really try and map it out in detail to know what we need when we need it. And the neat thing is, like I said, we're not just doing it, there's my electricity sector again, but we have to walk and chew gum at the same time, so we can map it both for electricity as a primary fuel, essentially gaseous fuels, and liquid fuels. And not just for cars, but what else uses liquid fuel? Boats, trains, planes, and it's a big thing. If we want to keep flying 747s, we want to take vacations, and we might not want to, we could kill that sector, but if we want to, then we're going to have to accept a certain amount of emissions coming out of 747s and reduce it lower other places. So again, it's a complicated, it's an interrelated problem, even though none of it's rocket science. So this is on the supply side, and then we can map demand, the places we use our fuels as well, and the places we're emitting. Light duty, heavy vehicles, I mean, you can really break it down. And all these sectors perform differently and have different requirements. This analysis has been done, again, in Europe, it's been done for the US as a whole. CLF is working on getting that analysis done for New England. It may look similar, but then we'll be able to plug it in for ourselves. Okay, what about Seabrook? What about Millstone? What about that pipeline? What about the offshore wind, right? It's one thing to know it in general for half the country at a time. It's another thing to show up at the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities with a contract that you and I will all pay for and say, does this pass the public interest test that we all want? We don't want to waste money. It's our money, but we have to do that. So we're trying to get this kind of study. But one of the things it's done is shown that there's a strategy here regardless of the path you choose, whether you want to go heavy nuclear, heavy renewable, heavy onshore wind, heavy offshore wind, that we have to get a lot more efficient than we currently are. And one interesting thing is some of the non-emitting, almost every non-emitting thing that we do work with is more efficient than the emitting. So an EV is about 40% more efficient than an internal combustion engine car. So the minute you make that switch, you gain efficiency and you lose the emissions. Same thing for a heat pump, 30 to 40% more efficient than any fossil fuel furnace. We have to decarbonize our electricity because that's what's going to let us decarbonize transportation for the most part and buildings. And then we have to do that end-use switching. Again, another thing that falls out of this analysis is what I started to say about time and stuff. So there are economic implications for this. There are behavioral implications, but I would posit for discussion that this is mainly, mainly about stuff. It's about your car, it's about your furnace, it's about the things that are generating electricity for for the grid. And like I said at the bottom, we're within one replacement cycle for power plants. Every power plant that's built now is built on a 40-year financial plan and an operating life, and we only have 32 years. Residential buildings, how many people live in a building that's less than 30 years old? I don't. I live in a 1920 house. So every building that's built now, we should reasonably expect it will be operating, and 80% of the buildings standing now, we should expect to be operating in 2050. So we have a massive retrofit effort behind us, or in front of us, excuse me. Again, electric power plants. But look, we have a little bit of wiggle room with things like our cars. They last on average 10 to 15 years. Oh great, we have 2 cycles. So you might be able to buy a non-2050 compliant car for your next car, but the one after that is probably going to have to be non-emitting. Or the one after that for sure. So we've got only a few cycles. Electric lighting, we can progress faster, or a lot of iterations there. Another thing that falls out of this, when you do this analysis sector by sector, and this is an example, I know it's hard to read, of for light-duty vehicles, internal combustion engine, that's what ICE stands for, and they looked at total VMT, and here, this makes some transportation folks mad at me, but they assume that vehicle miles traveled would continue to grow, not radically, but why? Because we're assuming that the population grows. Another way we can solve it is to stop having babies, right? Stop the economy, stop population growth, no GDP, our emissions will fall. This approach is to say, hey, let's try and figure out how to do it while we continue to grow, even if we want to slow that growth. So VMT goes up, but emissions by fuel is going down, and that's because we're changing out our vehicles from internal combustion engine to something else. Interestingly, that lag time shows up in this kind of analysis. 2039 is the last year in this analysis that they would allow, because if they allowed it longer, you wouldn't get to our emissions levels, allow an internal combustion engine car to be sold or registered. Because there's that lag time. If you sell it in 39, somebody's going to regularly expect to drive it for 10 or 15 years. Okay. So there are policy conclusions that come out of this kind of analysis. The other thing it lets you do is track costs really closely. And this is a different kind of thing than a lot of economists that model costs going forward. They try and guess costs. But there's great uncertainty going forward as to what the cost of offshore wind will be if we start building it at scale. So much uncertainty that a year ago, no one predicted the price of the first offshore wind contract signed in Massachusetts, and not by a little, but by a lot. It was supposed to be $120 a megawatt hour, 65. They were off by 50%. So when you can track costs and the intent of the costs, why is that important? You can start to show things like this. What is it going to do to a household? And there's a bunch of neat trade-offs. As you stop using gasoline, you recover a bunch of money. But maybe you're paying a little bit more in your capital costs for your electric vehicle. Same thing, home fossil fuel use drops, but maybe you have more electricity costs and costs for your equipment. This study found only a $35 per month net increase in household costs in the 2045 range. I have one more slide. Why is that important? Because this is Massachusetts' most recent emissions. They just came out this week, but I didn't have to change my numbers very much. 60% of the emissions left for us to cut are not from the bad guy corporations. They're not from the electric power sector. They're from what's in our garages and how we heat our homes. It's going to come down to you and me, which is another reason we want to be really attentive to cost and make sure we have a plan that people can engage in and support as we go forward.
Can we make sure that that microphone is working okay?
Yeah, it's cutting it out.
It's cutting it out.
Let me see. Can everyone hear me okay? It seems okay right now. Maybe we should change the battery.
While we're waiting for Larissa to change the batteries, so we're going to, after the last speaker, Mark Sandeen, we're going to take a few questions from the audience. We have some questions prepared, but we're hoping the audience will have a few, and we'll try to give everybody a few minutes to answer those. We'll see how we're doing on time. I mean, if people want to go a little bit over 9 o'clock, I think we should. We probably will. We'll see how many questions we get, and everybody can take a few minutes to answer them. And during the questions and answers, if the speakers want to comment on what some of the others have said, please feel free. And again, we're really looking for information here. So our other microphone.
So if you only have about 3% leaks, which is what we have in Lexington, you add 10% to your overall emissions. And so we put together a pilot program that we rolled out last year in Lexington, where we're identifying and plugging the super emitters, and we think that's something that needs to go on in concert with that. And to David's point, as you move to these highly efficient electrical heating and cooling systems, what ends up happening here, what you're looking at is, yes, your electricity increases, but as you get rid of your oil and you get rid of your natural gas, the total amount of energy that you use in your buildings goes down substantially. And so that's really what I had to say today. And, a lot of people in town ask me, well, how much is the Sustainable Lexington stuff going to cost? And every one of the programs that we put together has generated revenue for the town. We put solar on the town landfill and on our rooftops. It's saving us, it's generating revenue of $500,000 a year. Our community choice program is putting $1.4 million in the Lexington residents' pockets. The average Lexington resident in January through June of this year was saving $18.50 a month on their electricity bill and getting 100% renewable electricity. We've been doing a bunch of energy efficiency work in town. We've gotten grant money that's gone to the town, and we're saving residents money. For our municipal folks, the Green Communities Act has given us $750,000, which we were able to put into energy efficiency measures in the schools and other municipal buildings, and that's saving $460,000 a year. Lexington, let me give a shameless plug for Lexington, has more electric cars than any other municipality in the state of Massachusetts by far. We have hundreds more than Arlington and Boston anybody else. The only people that are beating us are Weston, who have more per capita than Lexington, but we're number 2 per capita. So anyway, we have put together a Let's Drive Electric program. This is a community buying program where we sort of pool our resources together, and we are saving people $6,000 a car on buying electric cars. So that's where we are. That's how you pull it all together. And thank you for what a wonderful setup for this whole thing.
Oh, thank you very much to all of you. That was really simple. My apologies again to David for that microphone going south on us. So why don't we take a few questions from the audience if people have questions. And again, when you answer a question, feel free to comment on maybe what some of the other speakers, if you'd like to comment on what some of the other speakers may have said during that. And we'll try to give 2 minutes to everybody for the questions. I have some prepared, which now I have a lot more after this. But let's see if people have any questions. And I'm going to repeat it for the benefit of our videographer. So go ahead. Actually, maybe we'll do it.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, maybe we'll do it.
All right. So who pays up front for the retrofitting of a home, and what would you do with, like, say, an apartment building? You know, there's a lot of communities that have apartment buildings. And the second question is the whole panel. I'm pretty ignorant on this. Can you guys go over the basic tenets of the Paris Climate Accord change and why it was so devastating that our federal government pulled out of that? Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of the camera, the questions are, number 1, who pays for the retrofitting of the older homes? Number 1. Any questions? Apartment buildings, sorry. And number 2, can you go over some of the basics of the Paris Climate Accord?
I'll do the first one.
Okay.
I'll try this.
Okay.
All right, so who pays? So we have, since we put in place the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Green Communities Act, MassSave has a lot of wonderful programs. They have a heat loan program for residents, and that heat loan program allows you to borrow up to $25,000, zero interest, and pay it back over 7 years. So you can put a lot of these measures into your home and pay it back over 7 years, and you can repeat. From apartment buildings, we have just passed something called commercial PACE in the legislature this year. We're rolling it out right now. Commercial PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And what that does is it allows commercial properties, which condos and apartment buildings are defined as commercial buildings, they're allowed to borrow and put the cost of doing these retrofits on the property so that you don't have to necessarily, if you're planning to sell it in 4 or 5 years, that the loan will stay with the property when it's sold. So it makes it a much easier thing in order to finance these kind of things.
And are there any tax credits that are involved with that at this point? I know, there certainly were before.
So when David decides to do some air sealing on his home, what you're going to find is that MassSave does that for free. All the air sealing is for free, right? If he decides to do some insulation in his home, they will cover up to $2,000 a year and 75% of the cost. So if you're going to do, you can get up to $2,000 a year in insulation.
And just for the record, MassSave is a great program. The investor-owned utilities run. Another question: where does that money come from? It comes from all of our electric bills, so it's one of these things we call it socialized. The cost has been socialized across all users of the system, but that money is there for homeowners. I will try Paris really quick. The Paris Agreement was something of an innovation in the world of international agreements after the perceived failure of the Kyoto Accord, which was more styled like a treaty, which is this binding, it's something lawyers feel comfortable with, like everybody signs, they have to do it. Paris, they backed off that, and essentially it was organized international cajoling, that there were going to be countries that said we're going to take a leadership position and we're going to do it, and every country was allowed, and I believe they're called NDCs, nationally determined commitments, where each country was in agreeing. They were saying, in a year we'll come up with our NDC, and there were guidelines for what reductions should be, but it was up to each country to do that. But it's pretty interesting. So the idea was to back off the law a little bit and use almost not quite social media, but get people to feel guilty a little bit, or feel like they want to lead, feel like they want to be part of a community. And it was, at the time Paris was signed, it was a wild success. Everybody signed on, NDCs were coming. So the impact of Trump's announcement is almost social rather than legal. It was just this one of the top emitters in the world, the second largest emitter, was basically saying, we're out. We're out. Huge economy, we're not going to do anything, we're out. In a way, it had no legal effect. A, because we aren't out. The first day that the U.S. can be withdrawn is the day after the 2020 election. So the November of 2019, is that 2020? I guess it's actually 2020. No, November 4th of, November 5th of 2020 is legally the first day we can pull out. So expect that to be a campaign issue. All we've done is announce we're not going to do anything. But in this thing that was supposed to work by sort of social commitment, it was not good.
Sure. Well, on the Paris Kyoto, actually, President Trump cited a study I had done as to why he was withdrawn. So I was actually on CNN and public TV explaining why that was a bad conclusion. What? Yes, yes. And in fact, what he cited was to say that the Paris Agreement narrowly was going to shave only like 2 or 4 tenths of degree warming off of thing, which is what the study said. That's part of this issue, is that it takes just concerted action. So every step along the way is a step toward that. So yeah, we're somewhat concerned. Our funding from the federal government has suffered as a result, but sometimes you have to, call a spade or whatever. I think your issue on how do you come up with this, I've just had some of these issues, a little bit of personal experience. I live in a condo in Watertown, and so I bought an electric vehicle. You don't have a place to plug it into the condo. Right. So I would say that our condo board is very resistant to doing this. One of the problems is the building was built in the early 1980s, and the whole electrical system is out of code. So if we do anything new on it, add capacity, we have to upgrade the whole electrical system. So there are issues here. You don't really control that. So I think that is an issue of just getting people behind those things. I have net zero electricity in my home in Maine, and so that was a solar installation of about $27,000. You get a federal tax credit of 30%, so that offsets some of that. I calculated the rate of return on it of over 25-year promised life, guaranteed life, of about 4%. It will last longer than that, so the return will be 7%. I do have
That's 4% per year?
What was the tax?
the internal rate of return of 4%. So it's like earning 4% a year on money. So it's a good investment. If it lasts for 35 years, based on the degradation rate of the panels, then it would be about 7%. So that's as good as a long-term investment in the stock market. You do have to come up with the money up front, so that is a challenge for something. I'd watch out a little bit. There were some plans you could get financed for 3%, but then you didn't get the cash discount of $4,000. So the internal rate of return ends up being, so you do have to look at what you're doing. The electric vehicle, I have a Chevy Bolt. It used to cost me $40 or $50 a weekend to travel to Maine. Now it's $8. Very little maintenance costs. It has a range of.
How do you charge it at your condo?
Well, I don't. I fortunately work at MIT and we have charge stations there, so we're able to do it there. So that is a challenge of getting it. Ultimately, I think if we get it around, it'll be convenient. But at this point, you have to do things about some of those things. I have a colleague who lives in Back Bay. He lives in one of those beautiful townhouses there, but he has to park the car in a, an alleyway, and he can't plug it in. So he can plug it in at MIT, but again, I think the workplace is an issue. So there are little glitches along there.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to draw a contrast here between, many of these wonderful things that are going on around Newton, certainly in Lexington, what we've heard, and then some of the calculations that John, I think, is probably able to do in his head when it comes to rate of return on investments that he's making. And that is that everything that we're talking about here is, one, complicated and takes a lot of work, takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of motivation to go and do all of this stuff. And here we're only talking about, a couple of towns in Massachusetts, if we're honest about this, right? And what we really need to do is decarbonize the entire country. Now, we can talk about these various programs, and we can try to convince people that this is a good rate of return, and if you invest $27,000, it will pay back at this rate, and it'll still be good when your house is sold. But on the other hand, I just remember that in 2008, gas went to $4 a gallon. And when it did, people changed their habits. Their businesses changed their habits. I remember distinctly that the automotive manufacturers started making more fuel-efficient vehicles. Okay? And that was just because the price of gas went to $4 a gallon. We didn't have to have a lot of subsidies. We didn't have to pass a lot of regulations that said, thou shalt build more fuel-efficient cars. So that simple price signal is actually very powerful in getting cities and towns, not just in Massachusetts, where we have the most educated population in the country, but also across the country. And when we do things here, we're doing them at a very small scale. We're certainly switching Lexington over to all renewables is not a small job, but really, at the end of the day, in terms of what kind of private investment is going to come out of that, what kind of new products or services are going to come out of that, probably very limited. You're working with what's available, commercial off-the-shelf systems that are available today. You're not really putting a big red sign out there that says, hey, entrepreneurs and private investors, come on in because we want these types of solutions and you're going to be the Google or the Apple of the clean energy revolution if you supply them. That kind of motivation, that type of private investment won't be drawn in until there is a gradually rising price on fossil fuels that's going to motivate that kind of investment. So investors can say, well, my return on investment will be this because I know the price of fossil fuels will be that. And trying to do this through moral suasion and everything, it's just going to take too long. And by the way, in Paris, not only did we have these defined agreements and so on, but there were two coalitions that got stood up. One of them is the Carbon Pricing Coalition, which is now a worldwide coalition of countries and businesses working to put a price on carbon in countries around the world, as well as the 4 per 1,000 coalition, which is an effort to increase the amount of carbon absorption or sequestration by just 0.4% per year. And that also is meant to, again, pull down carbon from the atmosphere. So 2 other things that happened in Paris.
Let's take one more question.
Larry, he had it up.
Okay, maybe we'll take 2.
So, before I moved to Massachusetts about half a dozen years ago, I was a commissioner on public utilities, commissioner of Ohio, and I've been working on these kinds of energy and environment issues for the last 35 years. So I appreciate a lot of the comments, and I want to say, here in Massachusetts, you're doing way more than most of the country and much of the rest of the world. But I want to maybe start with one of the things Gary said. It's not just that we have to decarbonize